Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and my guest today is Joanne Widner, an Alexander Technique teacher who lives near Richmond, Virginia. And what's of particular interest for this podcast is that before she became a teacher, she worked for many years as a registered nurse and exercise physiologist. And we're going to talk today about the topic is, we had a conversation earlier on, is the Alexander Technique really good for everything? And we're going to talk now a little bit about the implications for how you promote the Alexander Technique on your website, for example. Joanne, welcome to the show.
Hi, Robert. Thank
Hi,
you.
good to talk to you again.
You
And
too.
I wonder if you could quickly go through what you did in our previous interview about when you were teaching nurses. As you are a
Right.
registered nurse yourself, and you were teaching nurses in how to evaluate basically medical claims, right?
Right. Health
Health
claims,
claims, yeah.
particularly on the internet, because nurses get a lot of questions from patients about, is this herb good for me? Should I do some yoga? Whatever. Or they may have something that a nurse has never heard of, and they
Hmm.
say, well, here's the website. So,
Hmm.
how do you effectively evaluate a website for credibility?
Hmm. And the thing, well, just go through quickly that what you were told to watch out for.
Okay, well, there are several things to look out for, but the very first one is known as the snake oil ploy.
Hmm.
And that is, does this product or does this service claim to treat a whole variety of things?
Right, right. And one quite correctly should be suspicious of claims like that, right?
Right,
And it's not
right.
just I imagine it's not just nurses who are either taught that or taught to think that way or just think that way, but of course doctors, I'm sure it's the same sort of thing there too, right? A patient comes in and says, "What do you think about this?" thing that they haven't heard of, and the first thing they're going to probably do is go to the web and look it up, right?
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
likely
They would do some research.
they'll do some.
I mean, sometimes they're so busy, they just say, I don't know,
They might just say that,
and
right?
they leave it at that.
Right, right.
But if they get a lot of questions, again and again, should I do yoga, for example, they're probably going to look into that. Or if it's that popular, there's starting to be some clinical trials, and they're starting to open up their medical journals and see, yoga
Hmm.
is being good for back pain or whatever.
Right.
And then they'll feel more confident in saying, oh yeah, I think that would be good.
But for example, if a doctor or a nurse is doing that kind of research, and the first place they come is a website that is not does isn't specifically the result of doesn't specifically cover clinical trials, but just talks about the thing, whatever it is. In this case, the Alexander technique. Um, what are some things that a teacher who's putting themselves out there on the web, which I certainly recommend all teachers do, and I kind of ad nauseum been recommending that for years. What does that suggest, though, in terms of content of your site when it comes to conditions like back pain, neck pain, breathing issues, whatever? What does that suggest in terms of how we should word things and talk about things?
Well, I think you want to lay it out in kind of a general terms that Alexander has been shown to be helpful with whatever it is.
Hmm.
And then give a reasoned explanation as to why that is, how that works.
Hmm.
And then if you have a research study, which we do, we have a very good one
We have
in
an
the
excellent
case
one.
of
Yeah.
back pain,
Hmm.
be sure and cite that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And but I would think also just apart from back pain, other kinds of conditions, there's a certain level of caution that we need, I think, to approach that with. We can say, for example, it's helped people with that, but I think it would be very important not to talk ever in terms of cures or even diagnosing
Right.
conditions, because that's not really what most of us are qualified to do
Exactly. And to, always refer to ourselves as teachers.
as teachers. Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, and I had a student recently that came to me for back pain, and I worked with her, and she was an older woman, but she had beautiful use,
Mm-hmm.
and I really couldn't see anything that she was doing
Mm-hmm.
that was causing her pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I always ask my students when they first come to me, have you seen a doctor? And if they
Mm-hmm.
haven't, I encourage them to go. And in this instance, I said, you need to go back to your doctor because I'm not really seeing anything in how you are using your body that is causing this pain.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out she had cancer.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah,
something I think we really need to be alert to, that even something like back pain, where there's these good study and so on, not all back pain is due to things that we can help with.
that's
We
right.
have to be very, very cautious and careful about that. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've had students say with back pain or stiff shoulders or restricted breathing or awkward movement patterns that they come into your studio, and it seems pretty obvious that they're misusing themselves in ways that could very likely cause the conditions they're talking about, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think it's fair to even say that to them in a way, or maybe not, to say, well, I observed this and I observed that. But again, I would be really careful about saying that these lessons are in fact going to fix the problem for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think we have to be extremely careful about that. And to be really, if we're going to really be honest with ourselves, and I think the history of the technique, F. Matthias Alexander himself was not always all that cautious in his early writings. And he actually, I believe he talked in terms of cures for all sorts of conditions in some of his earlier books. I think he
Uh-huh.
moved away from that, but I just think we really need to err on the side of caution when someone calls us and says, I got this problem, can the technique help? I mean, that's the kind of question we get all the time, right? Just before
Hmm.
this interview, I just got an email from someone who says, I'm about to have back surgery. Do you think the Alexander technique could help? And that's
Hmm.
a tricky question.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it's
Yeah, and I think, a response to that is, well, it depends on what is causing your pain.
exactly, and
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 I
yeah.
can't diagnose you. I can evaluate your movement habits,
Hmm.
and and we can explore this, but I can't tell you definitively.
Hello.
Yes,
Oh, you see,
that was the
oh, there was
period.
a period after definitively. Yeah, and I think the other thing that we probably it probably is. I have a colleague who's a physical therapist, and one of the points that he's also an Alexander teacher, and he's pointed out that there are people with terrible use who don't have back pain,
Right.
and there are people with excellent use and who don't have cancer, who do.
Uh-huh.
And it's not a one-to-one correlation. I think that's something we have to be pretty cautious about bearing in mind and making clear. Is there anything else, like in terms of how you present the technique, say on the first page of a website, I agree with you that it would certainly be useful to bring in at least that British Medical Journal study. And there are some other studies, but they're not on as large a scale as that.
Right, right.
Um, but
And you know, if you want to keep your website very brief, you can always link to AMSAT's website,
hmm
which has a nice summary page of all the clinical trials that have been conducted thus far. I don't know if it's all of them, but it's the prominent ones.
yeah,
Uh,
no, you can direct people to what's available in the medical and scientific literature for sure.
right.
And yeah.
I would definitely have on the first page, if you're a member of AMSAT, to put that in there, and
hmm
so that people know that Alexander teachers do have a national society,
hmm
and that someone cannot teach unless they are a certified teacher, and what that certification involves, so that we know we have, they know we have a degree of education behind us.
hmm hmm Probably doesn't hurt to mention that the training to be a teacher is a 3-year process, right? It's
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
something you take a couple of weekend courses in to
Right,
teach.
right. And that
Yeah.
we now require continuing education
hmm
too.
hmm hmm
Um, so,
Yeah.
and any other credentials that someone has, I know sometimes students will call me and they feel more comfortable with me as a teacher as their first try at the Alexander technique because I do have my background in nursing.
hmm
That
Sure.
has credibility for them. Other people wouldn't feel that way.
Right.
So it just
Right.
depends on the target audience, I suppose.
Right. And is there anything else you want to say on this general topic, how we present ourselves to the public, and how we present ourselves to medical professionals too? Anything else you want to add that we haven't covered?
I think probably the most important thing is uh, having links to the medical research
hmm
showing the effectiveness of the
hmm
Alexander technique.
Right.
And it's also good if you have who wrote your website. I think a lot of teachers write their own websites,
hmm
but who wrote the material and when it was written, when it
hmm
was last updated,
hmm
so that people know that it's current.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think just generally the putting out the idea that we're teaching you a skill that has can have far-reaching implications, but that we can't specify exactly what they're all going to be because it's going to be different from one person to another.
Right. But I think we can say, you know, with a degree of confidence that the Alexander technique has been demonstrated to be helpful with
hmm
relief of back pain, with stress management, effective stress management, and with improving the quality of movement, posture, and performance, whether it's athletic or in the performing arts.
hmm Well, there's certainly a lot of anecdotal evidence of that. I suppose improving performance in the performing arts, I don't know how much actual research there is on that, but I think
There
there's
actually
some. I think
is a
there is
study.
some. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a study done that showed that Alexander technique was as effective as using a beta blocker medication
hmm
uh, to calm nerves
Oh, okay.
during a performance.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so there is research for that.
Right.
Yeah, and you know one thing we do run into with physicians as a group, you know they definitely like to see that medical research, um, but they also have actually a higher level of a higher standard beyond that,
hmm
in that ideally what they want to see is a body of evidence. And so while it's always good to have one study, if you have two, that's that much better. If you have sufficient studies that you can do what they call a meta-analysis, then that's what they really look for.
Yeah.
And Alexander technique is kind of unique. I mean, it's hard to meet that standard in that we're not a drug,
Right.
and
We don't have to
we're
get FDA approval
right. We're an
yeah.
educational process with
Yeah.
health benefits that's been around for a long time,
Right.
and so it's almost like we're out there. We have a good reputation. We're in a lot of universities, which speaks well for us. But then people have come along and done the research to back up the claims. And so it's a little different character to what we do. And so it's almost kind of hard to fit it into this box that scientists look at.
Right. I think also it's interesting to look at the research that's been done by an American neuroscientist in England, whose name I can't pronounce. Maybe you familiar with it?
It's an Italian name.
It's an Italian name, begins with a C. It's on my website. There, it's listed among all the medical and scientific stuff.
We'll call him Dr. C.
He's a PhD Dr. C.
Okay.
And what he's been interested in doing is measuring the effects of the technique on postural tone. And the thing that makes that work really stand out for me is that everything else, pretty much everything else, with one other exception, even the back pain study, is based on people's reporting of what they felt, what they noticed, right? Whereas his studies are all actual measurements of a real phenomenon, which until recently hasn't been possible to measure. But there's this amazing device that was developed at University of Oregon originally, which enables you to actually measure postural tone. And he's done a whole series of studies. I think there are at least 7 or 8 now. They're kind of coming out all the time. He's working at a very prestigious place, University of London, and in a very prestigious lab there. So it's high quality research. And he's been consistently showing that the Alexander technique can affect this very real and measurable phenomenon in a useful way. Right. And I think I think Alexander teachers have been slow to latch on to that, because it really it's to me it's very powerful research.
Yeah, I think so, and that is the type of study that carries a lot of weight among physicians and physiologists, and regulation of dynamic regulation of postural tone, which means improved performance.
Yeah, yeah. It's a way of measuring. It's a way of measuring something in a very precise way.
Yes.
That's the beauty of it.
Yes.
And
research.
So, anything else you want to mention before we come to an end?
I don't think so. I think we pretty well covered it.
Okay.
I know a lot of Alexander teachers, myself included, have some testimonials on their page. And I think those are useful. I think people like to read those. But they are considered kind of the lowest level of scientific evidence.
Right. But for the casual visitor, they can carry a fair amount of weight.
That's right. I think they're worth putting on there.
They're definitely worth.
But I'd also put in those links to the medical or scientific research.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if you're an Alexander teacher and you have some additional thoughts on this topic, and you enough for a second interview, let me know, because I don't see, I think this is a bit of an open-ended question. How do we address these issues in terms of publicity? My guest today has been Joanne Widner, an Alexander Technique teacher who lives near Richmond, Virginia, and she has for many years also worked as a registered nurse and exercise physiologist. Joanne, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome, Robert. It's always good to talk with you.